Hi, welcome to Danny After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight, I'll be featuring the case of the Wah Mee Massacre. So let's go ahead and find out more. Let's go ahead and dive on in. The Wah Mee Massacre occurred on February 18th, 1983. Quan Phi Mac Wai Chui, also known as Willie Mac, Tony Ng, and Benjamin Ng, shot 14 people in the Wah Mee Gambling Club in Seattle's Chinatown. 13 of those victims ended up losing their lives. However, one survived and would testify in one of Seattle's highest profile trials ever. It remains the state's worst mass murder in history. Well, let's go back to how this even started. The Wah Mee was a historic speakeasy and gambling club that dated back to the early 1920s. The club was described as a romantic, classy enclave patronized mainly by semi-affluent restaurant owners and business people in the Chinese community. The club hosted some of the highest stakes gambling that could be found, not only in just Seattle, but in the entire Pacific Northwest. Well, how is it that the Wah Mee operated? The Wah Mee Club ended up operating illegally in a basement space in a predominantly Chinese neighborhood. But they had a system in place and security that made it hard to be found. Their security, which was based in part of a system of passing through multiple successive doors. The club also had its regulars, which included many wealthy restaurant owners. Well, with such a system in place, and they had regulars, how was it that the shooters were able to gain entry? Well, they were known and trusted by the people at the club. Well, let's find out how. Willie Mack, he was 22 years old, and he had recently racked up several $1,000s in gambling debts. One of those debts was at a gambling club where he worked. So he came up with a plan, and that plan was to rob the wealthy Wah Mee Club. But he knew he couldn't do it alone, so Willie enlisted the help of his old high school classmate, Benjamin Ng. Benjamin had an extensive criminal record that dated back to his years as a juvenile. Willie also enlisted the help of Tony Ng. Tony was the opposite. He was a shy, quiet, and reserved 24-year-old, and he worked at his parents' restaurant in North Seattle. Now let's make note, Benjamin and Tony were not related. The robbery was not a spur-of-the-moment thing and had been planned out weeks in advance. Their plan was, once inside, to leave no witness alive, especially since club patrons knew them and could have easily identified them. So they committed the robbery and shot 14 victims. 13 were killed. They walked away with tens of thousands of dollars in cash. So is that where the story ends? Not quite. Do you remember how I said one victim ended up surviving? Well, that victim was Wai Chin, and he was a 62-year-old man who was able to free himself from the nylon cords that were wrapped around him, and he staggered out of the club to find help. He was able to identify Willie Mack, Benjamin Ng, and Tony Ng to police as perpetrators of the Wah Mee Massacre. February 24th, 1983. Benjamin and Willie were found and charged with 13 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. March 30th, 1983. Tony was still on the run and was charged in absentia with 13 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. August 1983, Benjamin Ng went on trial and was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. October 1983. Willie was next on trial, and he was convicted of murder, and his sentence was death. June 15th, 1984. Tony, still not found, became listed on the Federal Bureau of Investigation, also known as the FBI's, 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list. Well, that paid off. October 4th, 1984. Tony was found and arrested in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. April 1985. Tony was acquitted of murder, but convicted of 13 counts of first-degree robbery and a single count of assault with a deadly weapon. Each robbery charge brought a minimum sentence of 5 years, and that was to be served consecutively. February 17th, 1987. The Washington State Supreme Court issued a stay of execution a month before Willie's scheduled date of execution. May 2nd, 1988. The state Supreme Court let William's murder conviction stand. November 10th, 1988. Willie's execution was delayed indefinitely by a federal judge. January 8th, 1991. U.S. District Judge William Dwyer, he ended up overturning Willie's death sentence, saying that his attorneys failed to present evidence on their client's background that could have saved his life. July 16th, 1992. The Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals refused to reinstate William's death sentence. Now, November 9th, 1994. A King County Superior Court judge denied William's bid for a brand new trial, but it allowed prosecutors to hold a new sentence hearing. February 15th, 2002, a King County Superior Court judge scheduled a sentence hearing for September of 2002. Now, April 29th, 2002, a King County Superior Court judge ruled that William would not face the death penalty. Well, why was that? Because the 1983 jury wasn't asked to determine how much of a role he had in the crime. So he is now serving life without the possibility of parole. September 6th, 2006. A parole board met to determine whether Tony should receive parole on his 12th robbery term. If granted parole, he would begin serving his 13th term and be eligible for parole and potentially released in 2010. As you can expect, many of the victims' family expressed anger and outrage that they weren't informed when Tony had been paroled, though not released, after completing earlier sentences. They told the board they were never contacted each time Tony completed serving time for one count and then would begin serving time on the next, so on and so forth, effectively coming closer to a possible release. Well, Tony was denied parole. However, in 2014, after serving only 30 years, Tony was released, but he was deported to Hong Kong. That is the case of the Wah Mee Massacre. Thank you for sticking around for another episode of Danny After Dark. Do you have any questions or comments on this case? We'll leave it down below. Let's be interactive. Do you have a suggestion for a case that you'd like me to cover? Well, leave it down below. You may see it featured in an upcoming episode. Until next time, remember, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us.